we're going to have next up is Ross Hersemann. Ross is the founder of Loading Law, a Chicago-based law practice, and provides legal counsel to video game developers and entrepreneurs in the tech sector. Ross is also the organizer of Chicago Video Games Law Summit and an adjunct professor of video game law at DePaul University. So thanks for being here, Ross. Take it away.
Thank you so much. If you're joining me, I'm coming to you live from Chicago, and today we're talking about pandemic proof, leveling up your emergency response plan. As I was just introduced, my name is Ross Hersemann. I'm the founder of Loading Law, a Chicago-based law practice, organizer of the Chicago Video Game Law Summit, which is a day-long symposium dedicated to issues in video game law. We have all kinds of panel talks about copyrights, trademarks, privacy issues, constitutional law issues, and any other business legal topics that are relevant to your game in development or your small business. I'm also the chair of IGDA Chicago, which is the Chicago chapter of the International Game Developers Association. We do a lot of community outreach and resource development for folks who work in the game industry. So whether or not you're trying to break into the industry or give back to a new generation of folks, it's an amazing organization to get involved with. And if I'm not too busy with those first three things, I also am an adjunct professor at DePaul University. So I teach courses in communication and video game law, specifically for game developers, not for law students. So if you are a student at DePaul interested in learning how to start your own business, your own studio, or any other creative endeavor, it's a good course to take. And finally, I am also the vice chair of the American Bar Association's Digital Games and New Media Committee. What that means is I write opinions and papers that help influence actual government action related to the game. So anytime you hear about politicians talking about censorship of games or whether or not they're good for society, bad for society, and that debate continues to chances are I've written some kind of paper influencing some public policy in that arena. So before I get started, any talk that I'm giving, whether it's a course presentation at DePaul or a legal talk like this one, I always have to give my legal disclaimers. Lawyers love disclaimers. So I have to say first and foremost that the following is for educational purposes only. It is not and should not be construed as legal advice, only legal information. So everything I'm talking about today is going to be very informative. It's going to be very helpful to you. It's going to touch on a lot of issues you're probably experiencing, but chances are there are going to be some nuances to how you might need to deal with those business or legal situations that we're talking about today, especially if you are in a different state than I am. And since we're going out online, chances are you might be. There might be some specific local needs to your situation. So I will be providing lots of information today, but when it comes to specifics, we do not have any attorney-client privilege right now. So feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can either help you directly off webinar, or I can put you in touch with someone who can. So I always like to start with setting a roadmap. Already we've done introductions and disclaimers. If you're able to participate in the chat or drop a line in there, tell me where you're coming from and who you are. Tell me what you're doing. If you're a student, if you're a game developer, if you're an indie, a AAA, a small business owner, or someone who just wants to know how to cope with this crisis a little bit better, let me know so I know who I'm talking to. I'd love to customize this talk a little bit more for who's listening. Generally today, we're going to be talking about COVID-19. I'm going to do a little bit of catch up for those who may have been living under a rock about what it is, where it's been coming from, how it's affected the game industry in general. And I'm going to walk us through a couple things that you can do to stay safe, to start handling damage control for yourself, your personal life, your business life. I'm going to give some tips and tricks for helping you transition into working from home. A lot of us are under stay-at-home orders right now. I'm coming to you from my living room and home office. So we're going to start talking about ways to maintain our productivity and also our positivity, ways to try and stay productive and happy during this time, because Lord knows there's enough things out there to kind of take the wind out of your sails. I'm going to start diving into some small business strategies at that point. So if you are a small business owner, if you run a small game studio or local retail shop or business, I'm going to give a couple bits of advice and information for you to help keep your bottom line healthy and help you lay a strategy for the road ahead. And then I'm going to I'm going to close with some resources. I'm going to list a couple links to some folks out there who can help you with some specific issues that you might have. And then we're going to conclude with some questions. I would really love for some folks to reach out and ask some general that can help make this talk a little bit more relevant for you, help it apply more to your specific situation so that we can get the best custom experience that we can here. So COVID-19 is the subject of today's talk, and I always just want to start with some basic facts that COVID-19 is a novel respiratory disease, and this is affecting the entire world. There are over 3 million confirmed cases worldwide, just since late 2019. In the United States alone, it's over 90,000 and climbing every day. And unfortunately, that is over 20,000 deaths worldwide and over 50K here in the United States. These are some statistics that I pulled from a variety of sources, including CDC websites, Google, and just national news outlets. And the way that we've responded as humans has been very interesting. It has been inconsistent, to say the least, from country to country, region to region, and we're doing the best that we can. Just from my home in Chicago, seeing how we've been dealing with things, I've seen a lot of general misinformation over the last couple months, people trying to bring themselves up to speed, understanding what this crisis is and how to deal with it. And we've seen a lot of inconsistent applications of government responses, whether it's from the federal level, state level, local level. There have been some positive things like economic stimulus packages and stay-at-home orders that are all designed to kind of keep us safe and keep things productive and kind of help us keep on keeping on as much as possible. And a big part of that has been social distancing and isolation, which is how we're all coordinating virtually today. In addition to that, there's been a lot of protests, there's been a lot of uncertainty, and just the collective consciousness here in the United States, and we're all just trying to cope with this as best we can. That's the negative stuff. Now, the positive stuff, I've seen so many people rising to the occasion and really trying to make lemonade out of lemons here. And here in Chicago, our department has a fantastic makerspace at DePaul University, and a lot of the folks who are in charge of that literally took it upon themselves to take 3D printers, CNC machines, and other resources to their personal homes so that they could help make masks for first responders and people here in Chicago. There's been a lot of sharing supplies, a lot of people supporting one another, and it's a very positive thing to see. It's not all bad. In chaos, there's always opportunity, and I've seen a lot of fantastic instances of people kind of exhibiting the best behaviors humans can under crisis like this. So it's a good thing to see. And the video game industry has been no exception. It's been a very interesting kind of response period in our industry. For me, this COVID-19 kind of first came into my consciousness when it was affecting GDC plans back in January and February. There were reports out of China that this was affecting people and that some had come to the United States and that there were folks who were potentially infected and exposed in California. And right away, everyone started trying to figure out, are they going to cancel GDC? How is this going to affect travel plans? How is this going to affect me and where I'm going and where I'm staying and my networking and everything I planned for an entire year? So it was the 28th of February that they officially postponed GDC, and that is when things really got crazy for me personally and professionally. It was when I started getting a lot of phone calls from friends and also from clients who were saying to me, Ross, I had made plans to go to GDC. I was going to go there on Train Jam. I have hotel reservations. I have plane tickets. I have all of these industry networking events. I have interviews lined up. Everything really got turned on its head right away, and immediately we started segueing into damage control. So the first way that the video game industry really responded to COVID-19 was event cancellations. Major vendors who were going to be at GDC and South by Southwest and E3, and they started pulling out. They started saying, we don't want to risk the health of our workforce, so we will not be participating in this conference. And it just kind of snowballed from there. Past event cancellations and past all the postponements that were going on, we have started to experience hardware shortages and decreased production in the game industry because folks are working from home and they might not be able to go into the factory, they might not be able to go into the studio. We're seeing a shortage of hardware. Part of it is people are working from home and they're buying up things like webcams and gaming PCs so that they can start working from home. Part of it is on the consumer perspective of things. Folks are home and they want to play video games. They want to have access to a pleasant distraction. So you're starting to see shortages of things like Nintendo Switches at local retailers and on Amazon, and online vendors. And you're starting to see kind of a gray or black market cropping up of people reselling those things at inflated prices. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You start seeing these shortages for hardware and games as well, but you start seeing sales going through the roof. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Because so many people are working from home, a lot of titles have been delayed or canceled. Last of Us 2 was one of the more famous delays that has kind of cropped up due to this crisis. It was due to release at the end of May, and it's been pushed forward indefinitely. From the retailing perspective, a lot of retailers have been trying to deal with this crisis in different ways. Some have shuttered completely, some have done curbside sales, some have tried to remain open. GameStop tried to remain open as long as possible, saying that they were an essential service, and that so many people were going to be needing video games during this time that they needed to stay open to meet that demand. And I think in most states, GameStop is shuttered at this point to protect their workforce and just kind of to maintain their bottom lines as best as possible. But they came under a lot of public heat from their decisions on that front. Now, some positive things that have happened is the World Health Organization has really been touting some positive effects of the game industry. So this has led to a lot of folks who maybe didn't identify as gamers or who didn't game very often, kind of picking it up as a pleasant distraction and a good mental exercise. It's a great way to stay focused. It's a great way to remain active, great way to remain social with other people. So kind of the positives of gaming are definitely coming out lately. And the game industry in general there's been this fantastic outpouring of charitable relief and just positive public facing support for consumers and people in need, whether it's charities like Extra Life or Humble Bundle making games available at discounted prices or donating money to various causes, or studios directly putting money out there into the universe to help uh, displaced peoples or folks who are having trouble financially, who are out of work or financially hurting. There's been a lot of great charitable relief from the video game industry and a lot of pushes in positive directions. But the main video game industry responses have been that employers right now are trying to practice as much damage control as possible, and employees are generally transitioning to working from home and trying to cope with all of the nuances and difficulties kind of therein. So as we're talking about an emergency response plan today and kind of what we should be doing and what we should be focusing on and how we can all kind of get through this, the first thing I want to stress before anything else, before any financial plans, before any business plans, staying safe is what's most important. You need to take care of yourself, you need to take care of your family, and you need to take care of your friends. As this situation develops and changes, there's new information coming out all the time, but what we do know right now is that practicing effective social distancing can really help us flatten the curve, staying 6 feet away from other folks, wearing a mask and gloves whenever we're going outside on essential runs, and washing our hands with soap and water all the time is very, very important to flattening this curve and making sure that we don't overextend the resources of our medical staff and resources that we have there. So whenever possible, try and minimize going out, stay home, and stay safe wherever possible. So beyond that general, just good practice advice, we're going to be talking a lot about damage control for what you can do to kind of minimize how negatively affected you are by this crisis and how it's affecting the economy and your potential livelihood as well. So if you're an employer, the first thing you're going to be looking out for is, of course, your employees. You want to protect your workforce, and you want to be minimizing exposure risks as well as facilitating that transition to working from home. Chances are in a timeline, most of us are already working from home. So most employers helped facilitate this transition, 1 month or 2 months ago. But it's an ongoing issue as so many states are talking about kind of reopening the economy and going back to work. You kind of have to make a decision as an employer, what is the best long-term goal for keeping your workforce healthy and maintaining productivity. And part of that might be working from home. Even beyond a mandate that says that you have to, it might be good to continue to do that. So protecting your workforce is of vital importance. Maintaining your contacts and setting expectations for your consumers as well as your partners is also of crucial importance. Communication here is key. You need to be very transparent with your employees, letting them know what the situation is, what you're planning to do, how you're planning to move forward, and how the decisions that you're making are affecting them directly. This also might mean reaching out directly to your bank, your investment partners, and your publishers as well, just to kind of let them know, here's what we're doing, here's how we're responding to this crisis. This many folks are working from home, this many are still coming into the office. This is how our deadlines are going to be affected, because ultimately that's going to lead into communications with your customers. If this change in workplace regimen and routine is going to affect deadlines and affect production schedules, it's ultimately going to affect release dates and things your customers might be counting on. So keeping up the communication with your customer base as well to maintain expectations is going to be of crucial importance to maintaining just good PR and good safety. And from a strictly just fiscal, business, legal perspective, now is the time, if you haven't already, to really begin assessing your contractual obligations and your risks, figuring out when your deadlines are, when your milestones are, and knowing how they're going to be affected by this, so you can start either getting extensions on those deadlines or renegotiating contracts, figuring out if some of your contractual obligations have a force majeure, a clause that says in case of acts of God or pandemic or anything else that might be going on in the world right now, what your liabilities and what your risks are going to be. And when you're doing that, it's going to be best to connect with professionals who can help you with that. So if you don't have them on retainer already, reaching out to an attorney or an accountant to help mitigate your risks is of crucial importance for employers. And for employees and indies, there's plenty for you to be doing right now as well. If you had plans to go to GDC or Train Jam or any of these other industry conferences, chances are one of the first things you probably had to do was cancel your travel plans. You probably were looking to seek for reimbursement for expenses. You had to notify your employer if they were fitting the bill for you to travel. Those were some of the first things that you were taking care of. And for my clients, that was one of the first things I was helping them with. After that, you kind of have to figure out what comes next. And for a lot of folks who are, have been lucky enough to work from home, they have had less adjustments to make. But for folks whose jobs might be in jeopardy, or if they might be furloughed or laid off, chances are they're going to be seeking unemployment or other kinds of financial aid. If you're a student, thankfully the federal government has kind of put a stay on student loans for now. So that's a positive thing, but it's kind of the time to be reaching out to different avenues to figure out what to do, what to handle and what to delay. So a simple thing that is good to do right now is just start thinking of your next couple months in small increments. Think of your 1 month plan, your 3 month plan, your 6 and 12 month increments for what you need to be doing and what needs to be fixed today, what needs to be fixed tomorrow, what needs to be fixed a couple months from now. And of course, how that affects all of your own existing contracts and obligations, whether or not that's your mortgage or your student loan payments or your milestones for work. If you can't go into the office and take advantage of computers or other resources that you need to do your job, now's the time to be communicating those difficulties with your employer or your client if you're an independent contractor. Now, in that transition to home that so many of us have made, there's just some good basic practices that I have found to maintain productivity and positivity here. So first of all, you want to make sure that your supply lines are good. You want to make sure that you have food. You want to make sure that you have things like soap or shampoo or whatever other kind of essentials you need to stay home and stay healthy and stay happy. You want to maintain your technology as well. For some of us, this has meant investing in webcams or microphones or better computers or dual monitors. But you want to make sure that your tech is going to enable you to continue your lifestyle and your productivity from home. It's really important to stay informed, but try not to overdo it. I know it's really easy to get sucked into the news cycle and start watching CNN all the time. And in my experience, it just feels like sometimes the headlines are enough. You don't really need all of the commentary because it's real easy to fall into some anxiety if you're just in a constant news cycle. I can really recommend finding a routine as being very helpful for maintaining some degree of normalcy at home. Literally simple things, simple routines that you can fall into can make your day go a lot easier and kind of make this whole transition better. Something like waking up at the same time every day, making your cup of coffee, putting on pants is very important. Even though you're working from home, still treat going to the office like going to the office. That will help. That will really help the adjustment. And part of that is also setting your boundaries, your hours, and your goals. So having a designated workspace separate from your designated play space. If that means using a desktop computer to do your work and your laptop for fun, that can make a big difference. Having your dedicated hours as well. Don't fall into the hole of working around the clock or not working at all. Know that you're going to work from 9 to 5 or whatever's comfortable for you. And set some general productivity goals. They don't have to be complicated, but they could just be something simple to the effect of, I really want to balance my checkbook today, and I want to do some meal prep for the week. keeping those simple kinds of plans in your back pocket will really help this transition go a lot more smoothly. It'll really help you set that productivity and positivity. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can be productive during this time. Some of them are more work focused and some of them are more personally focused. But from a professional standpoint, this is a fantastic time to update your resume and your social media. If you haven't refreshed your LinkedIn profile or your portfolio on your personal website, or set a tweet deck or your social media posts, this is a fantastic time to do that, because literally everyone is behind a screen right now. No one is going out and everyone is really interacting with each other virtually more than ever. So it's a fantastic time to make sure that all of your social media and kind of professional presence online is really up to snuff. It's a great time to connect with industry professionals virtually. A silver lining that I can find in all of this is there are a lot of people that are inaccessible because you can only run into them at conventions, or they might only want to interact with people in a public space. They might not take phone calls, or they might not answer emails. I think the chances right now are much better that these people will be accessible to you via the internet. So it might be a fantastic time to start reaching out to people and saying, hello, I've always respected your work. I'm very interested in what you're doing. I'm a professional in a related field, or I'm trying to get into the industry that you helped pioneer. I would love to pick your brain, ask you questions, connect with you virtually. This is a fantastic time to do that. And since most of us have a little bit of free time, since we might not have to commute, or we might have an alternate work schedule, it's a fantastic time to learn valuable skills, both professionally and personally. So professionally, skills that you can be developing is taking a lot of online courses, training yourself in new softwares, new apps, or new professional certifications. As a lawyer, I've been studying new privacy laws that have come out this year, and how it applies to new technologies, things like Zoom as a platform. And my idea is that when this is over and when things return to normal, a very common question that's going to be coming up in job interviews for those who are on the job hunt is going to be, how did you spend your time during COVID-19? Did you make the most of it? Or it's going to be kind of a telling question for what kind of self-starter you might be as a potential hire. If you can say, well, during COVID-19, I had to react to this horrible pandemic, and here's what I was able to accomplish, or here's what I was able to learn, or here's how I was able to develop professionally, and here's how I was able to plan for what was coming next. And part of that productivity is also personal. It doesn't always have to be work focused. Sometimes you can develop some things in isolation that can really benefit you professionally that aren't necessarily related to your professional job. And by that, I mean picking up an instrument, learning how to play that guitar that you've had in your closet since high school that you haven't touched in 10 years, or brushing up on a second language, going on Duolingo or some other web service and practicing your verbs can really help you personally and professionally, and be a very productive kind of distraction from the anxiety that we're all feeling. Also, part of that positivity and general self-betterment that I'm kind of touching on right now is make sure to socialize in a virtual way. Social distancing does not have to be social isolation. Just because we're separated from each other doesn't mean that we're alone. We're all kind of in this together. So one thing that I always tell friends and family and clients is, you're never too old to call your mom. And believe me, she wants to hear from you. Call some family, call some friends. Use this as an opportunity to take up a pen pal or organize a weekly Netflix party. Maintain contact with your friends and professional contacts, because all of you are going through the same thing, and it'll go a lot more smoothly if you just engage in simple practices like sharing recipes, movies, or what you read that day. Now, if you're running a small business, you're going to have a lot more tangible things to do beyond the general self-betterment and mental health kind of questions. You're going to be transitioning your workforce and maintaining as much transparency with them to share your strategies for staying safe, and also sharing your strategies for maintaining your profitability. Your employees are going to be very apprehensive about what the future holds. They want to know if their jobs are still going to be there in 3 months or 6 months or a year. They want to know if they have to take a cut in pay or reduced hours. They just want to have some degree of normalcy in them. And part of your responsibility as an employer is, if you can't guarantee those things, at least offer as much transparency as you can to help alleviate some of those fears. A big part of running a small business right now, or any size business really, is going to be accepting the fact that business is going to be forever changed, and for a while it might stop. Other businesses are closed or operating at diminished capacity, and it's going to affect everyone's workflow and bottom line. From a government perspective, a lot of Secretary of State's offices are closed. That might not sound super important to a lot of folks listening, but what it means for a lot of my clients is if you want to start an LLC or make amendments to your LLC or change your tax filing or change any kind of financial issues with your bank, it's going to be impossible or very difficult, because if the Secretary of State's office is closed, if filings require in-person appearances, it can't be done. If you have ongoing litigation, a lot of courthouses are closed and it can't be done. And when things finally resume, there's going to be a multiple year backlog, so litigation is going to take a long, long time. When it comes to doing business with other businesses, when you're handling your B2B relations, they might be working from home, they might be suspending work. So that's going to affect your bottom line. If you're relying on them for independent contracting or assignments of work that you don't have time to do yourself, your contracts are going to be affected. So you really need to start talking with every other collaborator, investor, or partner to try and establish a realistic set of goals for what deadlines are affected and how business can continue, where it can continue. Part of that is going to be seeking assistance for professionals. A common theme to this is going to be reaching out to the right people, whether they're attorneys or marketers or accountants, making sure that you're getting the right business advice. And ultimately developing alternative strategies. Now is the time to be flexible. Now is the time to be innovative, and now is definitely the time to take some risks, because the things that have been working for so long that we've kind of taken for granted might not be working for the next year or so. So things like your client acquisition or hiring, the kind of marketing that you do, is going to be drastically different. I know a lot of indies, a lot of folks trying to break into the industry kind of rely on going to major conventions like GDC or Vector or GDEX to try and meet new people, to try and find potential employers, to attend talks and become educated. And a lot of those conferences are getting canceled or moving online or changing format a little bit. So you have to kind of change with the times and adapt as well, just like Vector is doing here. It's going to drastically affect hiring practices. A lot of businesses might be operating at diminished capacity, and they might not have the money in their coffers to be hiring new talent. So for a new crop of developers that are trying to find work right now, it's going to be a very hard time. I've had a lot of clients who have had employment offers rescinded just because 3 months ago there was money to hire people, and now everything's kind of upside down. And it's across all industries. There are plenty of law students that I mentor who are in a similar situation, and there's plenty of game design students that aren't sure what's going to happen in the next couple months. It's affecting everything from colleges to the business that we do every day. So in an alternative strategies, you're going to be changing how you do your marketing and how you do your business development. So your clients might be coming from different places, and ultimately there's going to be a much bigger focus on virtual connections. Now, when it comes to community outreach, I mean, it's going to be very different to engage with your communities, especially when you're finding customers or when you're finding a talent pool. So something I've seen that some businesses have done that's been very effective is kind of throwing their weight behind virtual game jams, virtual streaming, Twitch streaming for charity. So especially for things like Humble Bundle or Take This, a lot of companies are taking the marketing budgets that they would have invested in in-person appearances at conventions and throwing them behind virtual things. And that can be a fantastic way to engage with your community, stay positive, and kind of keep things warm until things return to normal. So that could be establishing some good public goodwill before things move forward. Now, ultimately, with the road ahead, I'm not a philosopher and I don't have a magic crystal ball, so I can't exactly predict what things are going to look like for the next year or the next 2 years or the next 3 years, because we don't know how long this is going to last. But I saw the housing crisis in 2008, and I saw how business was affected after September 11th, and I know the aftershocks for this are going to last for years. After 9/11, people didn't want to fly for a decade. And in a situation like COVID-19, where people want to stay 6 feet away from each other at all times, and we're all a lot more conscious about germs and hygiene and being close to people, I can't imagine that people will be enthusiastic about getting on trains and buses and planes again. So I think travel is going to be drastically affected, and the way that we all interact in our offices and our businesses and our personal lives is going to be different forever. I think working from home is not going to be an exception anymore. I think it's going to be an as good as option for a lot of businesses. So as employees, that might be something that you're seeking, and as employers, that might be something that you have to implement. That might be something that your workforce is going to be demanding from you in the next year or two. But for the time being, generally, I think it's best that we all stay connected. We all keep the chatter up. We all keep improving ourselves and our work, whether that's mentally, personally, or professionally, developing as many skills as possible. I think seeking assistance from one another and from professionals that are well positioned to offer it is the best way to learn and the best way to make sure that we're all in the know and making good decisions. And of course, planning for the worst case scenario, I think, as depressing as it can be sometimes, is going to be the financial and social best option for us, in the sense that way we won't be surprised and we have a plan for what to do. But beyond that, all we can really do is hope for the best and prepare for the worst, and find as many resources as we can to kind of help us mitigate all the things that we're working through. So I have a couple things here, and I'll make sure to make these slides available to the organizers so that you can all take them home and access the links that I have imposed here. But if you're looking for medical information about COVID-19 and how it's going to affect you and your family, or if you have any particular sensitivities to it, I found that the Center for Disease Control website has some fantastic information that kind of leaves the politics out of it. It's just very medical based and very factual. When it comes to government responses and financial information, when it comes for things like unemployment insurance or stimulus packages that can put $1,200 in your pocket or can help save your business and keep it afloat, USA.gov is a great place to go and find all of the latest updates that are coming through. If you're looking for some game industry specific resources, I can't speak highly enough about the International Game Developers Association and the Chicago chapter that I chair. We're always trying to put as many resources on there for game industry folks as possible, whether or not that's how to get reimbursements for travel, if you were trying to get to GDC, ways to stay productive, talks just like this one, or job postings and other educational resources. We're hosting lots of online seminars to try and keep you sharp while we're all kind of at home. And there's just lots of great resources on there to help everybody kind of get through this. And as well, mental health is the most important thing. If you don't have your physical health, you don't have your mental health, you don't have anything. And Take This is a fantastic organization that really solidifies the fact that it's okay to not be okay. So they have a lot of great resources on their website as well to help you kind of manage your disposition and make things go a little bit more smoothly. But beyond those resources, I highly recommend, depending on what region you're in, to start looking for resources from your local government, your industry associations, co-working spaces, and incubators. They'll have very specific localized information beyond the scope of this talk to really help you get through this. Local conventions as well. Keep an eye out for anything that's moving virtually. So we're at about the half an hour mark, and I'd really love to leave some time for some questions. So I'm gonna kind of take a snooze on lecturing here and just kind of take a look at the chat and open up my audio here and see if any of you have any specific questions for me related to any of the things I talked about today, video game law issues in general, my work at DePaul with the IGDA or my own law practice, and I'll just kind of turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hey, Ross. So I'm functioning as kind of an audience stand-in for questions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So we put together a list of some of the questions that people have been asking in chat.
Fantastic.
Let me pull that up. So Admiral Octavius asked, what is the status of the industry and sales right now? Should those in the indie spaces be worried? I'd heard a lot of conflicting news.
What is the state? It's a rich tapestry. So some titles are up. Nintendo Switch sales are through the roof right now. Everyone's trying to get a hold of Animal Crossing, and I've seen a lot of
Animal Crossing.
Here in Chicago, if you want a Nintendo Switch, ones that are being resold on Craigslist or Facebook are going like for $600 above the normal sticker price of $300 or $400. So there's definitely
that,
an
I think,
interest
in Ring Fit Adventure.
Say again?
It's that, I think, in Ring Fit Adventure.
That's the other one for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that sales are up, but I think that so demand is up and sales are up, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great time to be a game developer. It's, as always, a very hard time to be a game developer because I think just the workflow is so much different. If people don't have the normalcy of going into the office and producing things, or if they don't have the certainty of the normal marketing channels that they've had from their publishers, things can be very uncertain and very hit and miss. I know from an independent design perspective, it can be very intimidating right now because a lot of the resources that you would need access to get onto platforms like consoles are in a much diminished capacity. People are not picking up the phones and they're not answering emails as quickly as possible. So something that might have taken you 3 to 6 to 9 months, like getting your indie game on a console, might be taking 1 year or 2 years or 3 years now. So that makes things a lot more uncertain. But in general, I think the best course of action for now is just to, until the world stops turning, just keep moving on like we intend it to continue.
Folks introduced themselves in chat because you wanted to hear about where they are and where they're from.
Mhm.
So we have Alex Garbus, who is a game programming student based out of Louisville. Neo Belmer, who is a first-year attorney from California. Mild Mojo, who is a Chicago-based hobbyist indie dev and a RunJumpDev organizer. Admiral Octavius, who is a West Virginia-based game development senior. And Don't I Beg You, who is a Lexington-based software developer who works at an event app company and was just about to start their own indie dev studio, but just realized based on what you just said that they were going to have a hard time doing that.
It's a tricky time. It's not an impossible time. So some things, depending what state you're in, are moving on much as they have for a while now. Lots of Secretary of State's offices are completely automated and do all of their work online. So starting a business in your state might not be that difficult. And certainly creative processes work very well in isolation. If you just need to put your head down and get some work done, it's a great time for that. So it's hit and miss.
Yeah.
I know some people are really excited to start businesses right now because they don't have distractions. And then other folks are like, who am I going to do business with? It's hard.
Yeah. Alex Garbus asked, do you foresee remote working learning continuing to be common practice after the pandemic ends? Opportunities are limited to us folks in the East, so I'm honestly hoping that this whole situation will help break down the industry's location barriers.
I think that's a great point. I think that you're right. I think that there's a certain professional taboo about working from home, something that I've seen not as much in the game industry or tech industries because folks here really do enjoy technology and don't seem to be afraid of it. But in other industries, there's definitely some kind of hesitancy to let people work from home or let them work remotely, maybe because their employers don't have as much control over looking over their shoulder, making sure they're being productive or being able to
Yeah.
monitor their work. There's lots of focus in collaboration as well, which just kind of works better in person. But I think that you're right that one of the silver linings of this whole pandemic is more people are moving their work online, more people are getting familiar with it and getting comfortable with it. And I think when it's all over, a lot of folks will have grown accustomed to that and will continue to expect it. So from an employee standpoint, I think a lot of people might want to work from home. There's a lot of advantages to it, especially if you have kids or pets or social anxieties to going outside. There's a lot of pros to working from home. And from an employer standpoint, it could be a great way to minimize costs. I think that it might be a great way to cut down on expenditures like office space or software licenses. If you've got a task force that's happy to work from home and able to work from home quickly, efficiently, and happily, that might make you very competitive. So I think a lot of businesses might embrace the kind of lifestyle that we've been living the last couple weeks.
And I think to Alex's point, I think Alex is also talking about where, like, if you're based out of a place like Kentucky, sometimes it can be difficult to get a job somewhere like not Kentucky because people are like, oh, well, you don't live in Chicago, New York.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, but I could work from here.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
that could definitely catch fire in a very positive way. That could be a really good thing. It could be really good because you're absolutely right. There's no reason that you have to be in a major hub to do good work. great art comes from everywhere. So I
Yeah.
think that could be another advantage.
Do you have any details about changes with unemployment? Do freelancers or contractors qualify?
They do. So part of that varies state to state. Different states are having different initiatives. I know in Illinois, unemployment is being a lot more generous than it usually was. One of the buzzwords that's going around is an extra $600 a week for varying industries. So in my state, one of the ways that it's been affected is unemployment checks are going out faster with more regularity. There's been a lot of enhancements to the process of obtaining unemployment insurance. Just from like a website perspective, it's going a lot more smoothly than it used to. So
Yeah.
that's a positive thing. I know we've got some great resources on the IGDA main website about folks who participate in the gig economy and independent contractors and how to apply for unemployment insurance there. So yes, definitely. There are lots of financial support options for folks that are independent contractors, not just from their state or federal, but also just from the private sector. If you check out the IGDA website as well, there's a lot of resources on there for independent contractors and folks from the industry itself. A lot of major studios are creating foundations and funds for eligible people to help support them during this time.
Okay. Sorry. As more games are being offered exclusively digitally and games are getting bigger, do you see bandwidth caps going back to the way they were before, or maybe loosening up since everyone is working from home now and the internet hasn't completely broken yet?
That'll be really interesting to see, I think.
And that's from Illegally Cited.
Cool. I think that's an interesting issue. It kind of pushes and pulls because on the one hand, especially with this last console cycle, I've seen a very big push towards digital distribution, and especially for indies, sometimes it doesn't make financial sense to do a physical release because just the profit margins aren't there. So just distributing digitally just works that much better. And since a lot of indie titles tend to be smaller footprints for hard drives, it's just a natural way to go. With the next console cycle, it's going to change a little bit. I saw some interesting things with the new Xbox console where you're not going to be able to use your own external hard drive. You're going to have to purchase proprietary hard drives, and we're kind of shifting back towards a cartridge or memory card kind of style for that. So that might change access for what kind of games are available and how they're working. But to the second question of what is that going to mean for bandwidth caps, that's always a push and pull with the IT industry and Congress in general, because your ISP would love to charge you more for higher bandwidth. They really would. But we're getting to a point now where that just doesn't make sense for all the reasons that you described. The fact that we're all on Netflix, the fact that we're all doing Zoom calls around the clock, and the fact we're downloading games that are hundreds of gigs, and as you said, the internet isn't broken yet. I think it'll be interesting. Believe me, I would love to see faster internet speeds and greater reliability. One of my long-term goals for this country in general is actual government-sponsored public Wi-Fi without ISPs. I think that would really level the playing field for things so that there's not a paywall on good access to good internet.
What kind of language should be included in contracts to deal with COVID-19 in the next year or for possible events in the future?
Good question. This is one of the things that I've been keeping busiest with lately. So where COVID-19 would factor into most of your contracts is a clause that's called the force majeure. And the force majeure clause of any service contract or any document that you're working with basically allows for extenuating circumstances to the contract for things like fire, flood, act of God, technical failure, acts of terrorism, and pandemic. So clauses like that come pretty standard on most contracts. I expect it's going to become a standard industry practice to include the word pandemic in there because pandemic was not always included. It's not one of those traditional things that we always have in there because we've never had to deal with it on this scale before. But you can bet that this is now going to be a foreseeable issue. People are going to want to say, in the event of pandemic, in the event that we all have to work from home, we're going to need extended deadlines. We're going to need greater access to resources like faster internet speeds or technology or licenses that we can operate on our home computers. It's one of the things I've seen most often is a lot of software licensors are saying that folks are now in breach of their licenses for their software that they use for their software suites because they're installing it on their home machines and they had only paid to install it on their work machines. Well, fair's fair, you know, because you got to go home and you have to work from home. You can't exactly lug your giant tower back to your house. So I think that things like that are going to start finding their way into contracts more and more.
I mean, force majeure is how I got United to give me a refund for my GDC flight.
Mm-hmm.
So that tracks. Do you have information about support for businesses, like additional funding sources or tax relief?
Additional funding, taxes, and tax relief. Yes, I do. So some of the links that I have on my slides here are some great places to find some of that. So USA.gov is a great starting point, but it's by no means the end. I think what will probably be the most beneficial and informative for you are going to be your local industry associations and small business bureaus, because just like me, they're really reaching out to try and find as many sources as they can. You know, the professional industry right now is really trying to put as much information into everyone's hands as possible so that we can kind of minimize the negative effects here. So they're going to have more information than I will on things like local tax incentives or tax relief or benefits. I know a lot of local communities are doing specific things in addition to the more wide sweeping state and federal stuff.
There we go. Being that we are required to do remote, would internet services be a tool reimbursement?
Very likely. It's going to be very interesting when people start filing their income tax returns this coming year, I suspect, because one of the most common deductions that people often will take is a home office deduction. It's one of the more common ones on your federal income taxes. People can deduct the costs of things they purchase to build a home office. And I think that that could apply pretty easily to your computer, your monitors, your keyboards, your mice, your webcams. If you need a new desk, if you need a monitor stand, if you need file cabinets, papers, printers, any kind of technology or products that relate to you're doing your business at home, absolutely. I think that there will I think already there are methods in place to give you discounts on that. And I think that employers as well might be incentivizing that kind of work. What I've seen often for folks who have it worked into their employment contracts already that working from home is necessary, they might be issued a work cell phone, a work laptop, a work jetpack Wi-Fi access hub, so that they can do all of the work that they do at work on completely employer operated technology at home. So I think an interesting blurring that's going to happen there is if you go home and you're working on your personal computer, but you're doing professional work, I think employers might find themselves in a liable, risky position if they're not providing technology to their employees, because all of a sudden it's like, well, is that moonlighting? Is it not moonlighting? Does that violate our software licenses because they're using it for personal computers or professional ones? It's going to be an interesting time. So I think that there's a very good bet that employers will be reimbursing employees potentially for hardware and software.
Okay. With a new generation of console launching, do you see any particular impact for developers? Can people get dev hardware? Any advice for approaching legal issues like contracts?
Definitely. The one piece of blunt advice that I'll actually give in this talk today that's not just legal information is I advise you to hire a lawyer. I advise you to hire an accountant. It's
Always?
so important, always and forever, in whatever context you might need it. It's important. And it's not because they're smarter than you, it's because they deal with issues you don't deal with on a regular basis. And lawyers and accountants and professionals have different definitions for words we use every day. So we're going to read contracts much more differently than you will. With a new development cycle and a new consoles on the rise, everything's going to be different. Everything changes. So when it comes to getting a hold of those dev kits or actually developing for those consoles, the best way to get access to those are through the direct websites for those platforms. So Microsoft, Xbox, Nintendo, PlayStation, or if anyone wants to develop for the Atari VCS or any alternative platforms, all of those websites have already pitch decks and applet software for getting a hold of those resources. Reaching out to local developers in your community who have a proven track record of already developing on those consoles might be a great way to get access to those things as well. I know there's a lot of proprietary contracts related to when and where and how you can share dev kits. but if you know someone who went through the process, reaching out to them is a great way to get some insider knowledge there. And when it comes to kind of maximizing your efficiency for developing for next gen consoles, the thing that most of my clients will be doing is to kind of make that easier when it comes to localization is either using a engine like Unity or Unity or Unreal that automatically can just output to whatever platform. Is one way to make things a little bit easier. If you're using a proprietary engine or doing something fancy, it can get a little bit more complicated. But from a professional legal standpoint, often a lot of those issues get left up to your publisher. So if you're an indie, you might want to focus on making the best game that you can and then bringing people in to help you market a Kickstarter or find a publisher that can help you with things like localization or ratings board certification or getting onto those actual platforms. That's a big bargaining chip that a lot of publishers and distributors will bring, is they'll say, your job is to make the games, our job is to sell the games. Don't you worry about putting it on a platform. You make the coolest thing you can and we'll handle all that for you.
Admiral Octavia said it might be a little off topic, but how do we go about trying to connect with other devs and do deeper networking during this time, considering I can't go grab lunch or chat after a panel with other devs right now?
That's not off topic at all. That's fantastically topical. I think that's the most important thing we can all be doing right now because, you know, work is suffering. It is harder to do work, and just what you said, it's very hard to go meet people at your local meetups. So I know a lot of communities are really trying to stem that gap by offering things like Discord channels, AMAs, or other virtual meetups. In my local Chicago, our local industry night that meets every week has moved onto a Discord channel. IGD Chicago has a Discord channel, and we're hosting AMAs instead of doing in-person panel talks. Local conventions, just like Vector, that you're watching right now, have moved virtually. And thank you, Vector, for doing that, by the way. It's fantastic. Those are all great ways to stay connected. And I think beyond that, never underestimate the power of Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I've been shocked at how many amazing connections clients of mine have made with industry professionals over my head just because they were able to tweet at them. So if you have a strong meme game, or if you are very respectful in a professional LinkedIn context, reaching out to someone and saying very earnestly and very humbly, hello, I'm an aspiring developer, I'm a student, I'm a professional in a related field. I respect your work. I am intrigued by this specific thing that you do or did or produce, and I have a very specific question about that, or would like to pick your brain for a very respectful amount of time. I think that people generally do like to pay it forward and are very amenable to helping. So I think that just straight up reaching out to people, if done respectfully and tastefully, can really yield some fantastic results.
Any legal security issues with conferencing software? What about talking about confidential information over these services? Should they be encrypted? Any liability?
Always liability, always encryption, always careful is the is the short answers there. Yes, for a longer answer, there's lots of concerns right now about the security of various platforms. Zoom has really fallen under fire lately because Zoom bombing is a very real thing. I've encountered this in some of my classes. I use Zoom for my courses at DePaul, and we've had some instances of people punching in random meeting numbers to try and see where they end up. And it's kind of creepy to think about, but there are some people on the internet who would very much like to be in a room of college age game devs. And we don't really want them there. So simple things like including passwords on all of your Zoom meetings is really preferential. If you need more security than that, different platforms offer more. So for example, Microsoft Teams has a little bit more security. Skype has more security. A great way to find out some of the most secure platforms is actually to go through HIPAA channels. So the medical profession has lots of extra security measures when it comes to protecting information. So if a platform is greenlit by HIPAA, that's a fantastic way to make sure you've got a little extra encryption. When it comes to discussing confidential information, when you're online, you never know. So it's always best to never say anything that you wouldn't want your mom to hear or you wouldn't want your boss to hear.
But I think that is all the questions that we have for you today, Ross.
Super.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was an excellent talk.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
It is always great to have you. And people can, of course, find you online at Loading Law. You're pretty easy to talk to. And hopefully we'll see you next year in person.
Absolutely, I would love to. Everybody stay safe, stay home, and have some fun, play some games. It's not all bad out there.
Okay, well, thank you. And if you all stay tuned for 5 minutes, we should have another talk.